Good afternoon and welcome to Live with the Brand. I'm Ken Eifert and I'm here at the Certified Angus Beef Culinary Center in Worcester, Ohio. Today, we are looking at some underutilized cuts, the thin meats, sirloin flap, flank, and the skirt steaks. Incredible pieces of meat and historically found in the Latin segment, but we know there's a place for them in your steakhouse. And so we're going to hear from the Clarks, Diana and Daniel Clark, our husband and wife meat scientist team, along with executive chef, Chef Ashley. Now, if this is your first time joining us, thank you for being here. I want to encourage you to go to our website, click on Culinary Center, and click on Live with the Brand, and you can view some of our previous episodes on the chuck, top sirloin, and also some rib innovations, some excellent episodes. We also encourage you to ask your executive account manager about visiting us. Our Culinary Center is bustling again, finally, after the pandemic we all just went through. And remember, always ask questions. If we don't get to them on the air with you, we will follow up with you afterwards. And one little side note, I actually won't be the one answering questions today, as we actually pre-recorded this session as I'm out on paternity leave right now. I just brought home a brand new baby daughter with my 2-year-old son, so I won't be live again until July. So take in this hair that I have, this luscious hair, and we'll see. There might not be much left come July. And don't worry, you're in good hands with Chef Ashley, Diana, and Daniel. And I'm really excited to bring you back to our meat lab for the first time on Live with the Brand. So let's go check in and see what Diana and Daniel are up to. See you guys.
Welcome to the Meat Lab. I know this is some of your first time ever being back here, and we kind of just thought, well, why don't we do it in the Meat Lab? I mean, Ken's gone. He doesn't have control of anything right now, so let's have some fun in the Meat Lab. So what we're going to do before we get into some of these cuts is let you know that you can come to the Culinary Center really at any time. And you're gonna be able to spend all this time back here with us breaking down sides of beef. You can spend valuable time with our chef team perfecting things on your menu. You really need to consider coming to Worcester, Ohio. I mean, it is the destination in the United States. I'm gonna say that, the destination. Don't you think?
I agree,
See?
completely.
So before we dive into some of the versatility of these thin meats, I think we're gonna walk through a side of beef to kind of show you guys exactly where these cuts are on the carcass, because it helps you just completely understand them a little bit more.
Yeah, and those that have been to the Culinary Center, we know there's a lot of you that have actually been here before. This is kind of old news to you, right? You already understand all these different problems. You've been here, you've seen it. But those that haven't been here at the Culinary Center, you're getting a little bit of a spoiler, because we almost always have a side of beef that we go into and talk a little bit about that. So this is something that you'll review the next time you come to the Culinary Center. So let's talk a little bit about our primals. So first off, this is a side of beef, right? It's not a full carcass, but a side. It's actually a right side of beef. And just to orient yourself a little bit, this up here would be the tail. The head would be down here. So this would be our hind quarter, and this then would be our fore quarter. Now, when it comes to the primals, we actually have our round up here, our loin, and our flank behind it. Over here then on our fore quarter, we have our rib, our plate, our chuck, and our brisket. Now, if you forget those as we get to talking, they're all right here. Okay, so there's a great demonstration of those different primals as well.
You know, we just remodeled our kitchen. I feel like that might look pretty nice.
That would look pretty cool. Yeah, that would look pretty cool.
Not a bad idea, right?
Okay. But we're actually going to go ahead and get started here. These thin meats that we're talking about today, we actually have kind of taken a different side, broken it down, and we have here that we're going to actually get to some cutting on this. And Diana has the rib and the plate still attached. I've got the loin and the flank, and let's kind of dive into these and show them where these different thin meats come from.
So the first ones we want to talk about are our outside skirt and our inside skirt. So first, let's get this outside skirt free. So I'm just going to cut down. There's this membrane that sits on top of that outside skirt, and this is something you guys are all going to want to just come a little bit closer, turn up the volume on your camera, and let's just be quiet for 1 second. Oh my goodness, every time. It just
She gets that
feels
excited
so
every
good.
time that she does that. Every time.
I'm telling you guys, if you're live and personal here, you'll know the feeling. It's not that weird. I'm just get used to it, all right? So pulling off this outside skirt steak, it's literally hanging out in the cavity of the animal. Okay, that's a lot of times why they call it that outside skirt. I'll let you trim that up a little bit.
Yep. Now notice something really quick that
Yeah.
Dinah actually peeled that. That's what she did when she peeled that connective tissue out.
That
And then
membrane.
there's another membrane on the other side of this. So sometimes you might have heard this called a peeled versus unpeeled outside skirt, and that's what we're talking about there.
Yeah, so if you think about that, sometimes you can order an unpeeled outside skirt, and it's usually going to be cheaper than your peeled. But remember, this is really yield loss. I mean, you're going to cook this. If you left it on there, that seasoning would probably come off, but you're not really going to be able to eat this. This would be really, really chewy. So getting it peeled really is a wiser idea, especially if you're short on labor. You don't have someone to sit there and peel your outside skirts all the time. But we also need to think about the same thing when we're looking at our inside skirt. And the inside skirt kind of sits inside that cavity. Okay, this is the transverse abdominis muscle. It literally transverses across the abdomen, and its job is to actually hold that big, heavy rumen up.
Let's take just a second, talk a little bit about that, because I think that's an important distinguisher between the outside skirt and the inside skirt, is that rumen. So those that maybe are less familiar what the rumen is actually one of the chambers of a steer's stomach. Okay, so it's actually the first and the largest chamber of that stomach. It can actually hold up to 35 to 45 gallons of liquid. Okay, imagine how heavy that is. Okay, and Diana just talked about how that inside skirt, it's responsible for kind of holding that rumen up. So imagine how much work that muscle is doing to hold up about 35 to 45 gallons of water. That's a lot, okay? Now that is, if we compare that to the job, the biological function of the outside skirt, the job here is actually it's the diaphragm. So it's helping the animal breathe. It's not really helping, it's responsible for moving those lungs.
Yeah, let's hope it's doing it.
It's taking the air in and out, right? So that is what this one's doing. It's not doing much heavy lifting. So this one actually is very tender compared to the inside skirt. The outside skirt just is, I would consider it, I would say significantly more tender than what the inside skirt is.
The easiest way to remember it, outside, outstanding. And we usually say inside in a marinade because that's usually the best way to prepare that to break it down a little bit further. But looking at this inside skirt, I will have to say this is only part of the inside skirt. So typically in a large scale packing plant, they would actually take this inside skirt from that hind quarter, and Daniel's going to do that here in a second, and flop half of it down before they rib the animal, because this was ribbed between that 12th and 13th rib right here, and that's what split our inside skirt. But usually they would flop it down so we'd have the entire thing. So we'll be able to see that all laid out, and I'm going to continue trimming on this one. If Daniel wants to get the other half of the inside skirt.
Really quick, before we get into that, I want to make real quick note. If we zoom in a little closer to these cuts, you'll notice that they are a little bit darker in color. The reason for that is the side that we're actually using today, that we're cutting on, has actually been dry aging for what, about a couple weeks probably now?
Yeah, at least in our cooler for a couple
yeah.
weeks. Probably aged a little bit more even in the bowling ants cooler where we got the side of beef from.
So this has got a little bit of age to it, and the longer it's dry aging, we start to see that crust start to forming on the carcass. So it is a little bit drier, darker in appearance for that reason. It's not typically going to be the case. It typically will be it'll be cut, fabbed right after it's been harvested, right? That's how the typical industry works. So that's a little bit unique to our instance.
So now going into that hind quarter, first Daniel's going to get off the rest of that inside skirt. So we'll be able to lay these out side by side. I'll trim this up just a little bit more to get some of that fat off of there, more of get that bright cherry red color shining through. But that's one thing to really note about these as we see them side by side, that inside and outside skirt, they do look fairly similar in terms of texture. They both have those muscle fibers running in that similar direction. So really, you start to think about, if you're using one of these, you should be confident and comfortable switching to another one. And that's really key with this versatility of these cuts right here. So like I said before, as I had the membrane on mine, Daniel's peeling that exact same membrane off of his as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to start taking off this inside skirt. Remember that this is only half of it. The other half all came from, Diana's already cut out. So this is going to be that second half. But something, Diana, as we get talking about this, we've heard a lot that labor shortage is kind of an issue across the entire country. But this in particular, these thin meats, we have a pretty good solution with it in our value-added product line. So that's something you can kind of dive into a little bit more?
Yeah, that's definitely a great opportunity to talk about some of our value-added processors that will actually utilize our inside skirt, and they'll make a marinade on it, a neutral marinade to be more specific as well, so that way you can add your own flavors and everything to it, but you don't need to worry about taking the time to marinating it and letting it sit in your facility. Basically, it's ready to use, get that flavor on it that you're looking for, and move forward from there. And they do have some flavor profiles to choose from as well, but it's just great to think about, especially during this time. I know that it's not always convenient to use a value-added product, but I think right now it's definitely convenient. And when you're working with high-quality certified Angus beef, you know we put some stringent parameters on our value-added products. We want to make sure that the processors that we're working with have integrity. We test all of our products before we say yes to them going to market. We know that they have to make our specifications as well. So these are high-quality value-added products. They're not cheap run-of-the-mill things that you can find elsewhere. So that's just something really to consider, especially as we go through this this pandemic together. But here is kind of how these two pieces would be found. So you could see that inside skirt is much larger than that outside skirt. So you can kind of get a little bit more use out of this.
Yeah, that's a great comparison because they do look really similar right there. But just know that there is a difference, but at the same time they are interchangeable, especially if you use some of those neutral marinades you're talking about.
Oh, I know, right?
So next we're going to go ahead and pull off our flank steak. So our flank steak here is obviously on our flank primal, makes sense. We can just pull this down. I've already took off that connective tissue off over top of it.
And the flank is the rectus abdominis. So it's actually your six-pack, okay? Just in case you guys are wondering, you're working on your six-pack, you're working on your flank steak right there. It's what we should start saying at the gym, right? This is how my brain works, it's fine. But this flank is, to me, it's such a fun cut. It really, it used to be extremely, extremely cheap. And then all of a sudden, people started gravitating towards it again. I mean, this was the original London broil. And now I feel like it almost can have the hashtag forgotten flank. I don't know if any of you guys agree with that or not, but I feel like I don't really hear much discussion around the flank anymore. Especially in the culinary scene, it's almost like it's not cool, but I really do just love this cut. I mean, Chef Peter has a great bourbon marinade for this sucker, and he actually just cures it in bourbon. Have you guys ever noticed how many alcoholic recipes that Chef Peter has? Is that just me? I feel like really most recipes that he has involve alcohol. There might be something going on there, I'm just saying. But he's a lot of fun in the kitchen. I do have to add that. So this flank steak, though, again, it doesn't look really similar to our inside and our outside skirt in terms of those muscle fibers running this way, but you can easily see the muscle fibers running down that way. So it's another one that you would slice against the grain. And that's something to really consider. Whenever you have those cuts that you can see those definite muscle fibers, it's really a good idea to make sure that you might provide some leading slices for your customer, so that way they know how to slice it appropriately. Otherwise, when you slice with the grain, you're going to get a chewier bite.
Yeah, that is key. That is key with all of our thin meats, is if you're cutting it, it needs to be cut against the grain, right? That is really, really important.
I feel like that is a culinary 101, but you have to remember that a lot of consumers don't know that. So sometimes providing that help for them is awesome.
Yep.
So now, what are you working on?
Yeah, I'm working on the sirloin flat. And this is basically, it sets right kind of almost underneath the tenderloin.
Yep.
So we can go ahead and just kind of roll your knife under there. Now, just so you know, the sirloin flap is my absolute favorite cut. If you have not had the sirloin flap, I always say you need to evaluate your life choices, okay? Because that is that good, in my opinion.
Okay, I will have to say, so prior to Daniel coming to work at Certified Angus Beef, I preached the sirloin flap at home, but he was all, well, it's no teres major. That was usually his response. And then he comes here and he falls in love with it. Might be because he finally had a chef prepare it for him instead of me at home, but still, it's like, come on, I've been telling you this for years and now it finally takes hold. But
It's pretty good.
it is a pretty good cut. And the sirloin flap is actually the oblique muscle of the animal. So it really doesn't need much marination. It's pretty tender because really the only time the cattle use it when they're out twerking in the field, party till the cows come home. So it's usually rarely used too much. But you'll notice it is a little bit thicker than some of our other cuts. So I'm just going to sit here and trim this off a little bit. Again, this is something, getting sirloin flap, you would have to do this, but it's usually trimmed down quite a bit coming in. You don't really have to do much work when they come in a bag. And there's usually 4 of these per bag as well. So as you look to some ordering options, this is definitely a great, great piece to utilize.
Yep. And there's a few different options with your sirloin flap as well. You could actually roast it whole and do kind of like a carving almost station, a little bit of a carving station to it. That would be an acceptable application. You could also make this into steaks, sometimes called the bavette steak. The bavette steak, it's very popular in Canada and the northeast part of the United States.
Yes.
And if you actually, can we turn it over for just a second, Di, where we can kind of show the muscle fibers?
Trim.
You're trimming, sorry. So this is, you can see the muscle fibers, very, very distinct running right here. And what you do when you're making bavette steaks is you actually can cut steaks with the muscle fibers. So cut them like that. And then, again, you go back to what you were talking about earlier, that leading slices. Make sure that when they actually get that piece, that then they go ahead and start cutting it against the grain. Very, very important.
And this is one cut, too, that kind of puffs up even when you cook it even more. So some of those muscle fibers kind of come together a little bit. Our chefs actually make a really good sriracha bourbon marinade for this, too.
It's fantastic.
This takes a marinade really well. But you could come in, so like Daniel was saying with those bavette steaks, you would cut off these end pieces just a little bit, but then just follow the grain as you're cutting the steaks. Makes it the easiest way, but always, always, always give the leading slices for that customer for sure.
And the other option you have, right, that's we've talked about, cooking it whole, making your bavette steaks, or you could also come in what we call it butterfly. So you actually would come with your knife and cut like this and cut thinner slices. If you do that, you almost have something identical as the outside skirt. And both of a look and in flavor and texture and just overall profile, I would argue you probably actually wouldn't even be able to tell a difference between the two.
I mean, because the sirloin flap is loaded with marbling. And we have a lot of Latin American restaurants that will do that, and they are phenomenal. They could actually butterfly this 2 or 3 times, which blows my mind. I have struggled doing it once. So it really can add a lot of bang for your buck, though, when you consider that, because you're getting so much meat out of that purchase.
Yep, which is really kind of probably a good segue into what we talk about next, which is pricing. Because that's when we think about kind of why would we want to butterfly this when we could just order the outside skirt instead? Well, the reason is when it comes down to pricing is out of these 4 options here, the outside skirt is the one that tends to be more expensive. So if we look at a 5-year average between these 4 on the same graph, we actually find that the outside skirt is the highest price seasonally, and it also does have some seasonal fluctuations. Actually, all of them have a similar seasonal fluctuation pattern, and that all of them tend to peak in pricing right about late spring, early summer. right about Cinco de Mayo, okay?
Oh.
Makes sense, right? These are great,
Who would've thought?
yeah, Latin cuts. So that's the outside skirt tends to be the higher priced one. Next, we'd find the sirloin flap. So again, it is a way, if we start butterflying that out, we could find a cut that's a little bit less expensive and a great substitute for the outside skirt.
Yes.
Albeit, it's probably still on the higher end in terms of pricing, but I think you kind of get what you pay for, right? When you eat a certified Angus beef sirloin flap, in my opinion, there's not much else on the carcass that meets that.
That is pretty phenomenal.
Really, really, really good. And then next in line would be our flank steak. So this is kind of, in terms of pricing, again, same seasonal fluctuation that we do see this kind of peak around that late spring, early summer, but it is a little bit less expensive on a per pound basis. And then the inside skirt would be here towards the bottom. And in terms of pricing. So if these two are maybe a little bit out of your price range, if you want something that's a little bit more value or whatever, yeah, these might be the option for you, something to think about. Now, something else, as Diana talked about earlier, is we do have many different value-added product lines that go right along with this. And like we were saying, we know labor is an issue, and that value-added product line is something that you really should consider with any of our thin meat options, right?
Yeah, without question.
Yep.
I mean, they're phenomenal.
Yep.
And you still get the high quality taste that you're looking for when you want to order certified Angus beef. And that's the beauty behind those lines for sure.
Yep. Now, I do want to point out one thing, and that pricing, right, this year has been crazy.
In everything. Is
Yeah.
anyone building something right now? Anyone? Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah,
okay?
it doesn't matter what we're talking about. When it's a consumer good, pricing has been just
Wanted to
crazy.
make a birdhouse.
Yeah.
And goodness, $300. That's crazy.
So let's just show a little graph of what prices have looked like so far in 2021 for these four items. Like what we've seen with our 5-year average graph, it's the same thing here. We do see that the outside skirt has been the most expensive, and we do see it right now is the highest it's been throughout the year, which kind of goes with what we think with seasonal fluctuations.
Yeah, so
we
it should
should
be
see
going
that
up.
start to turn around and get a little bit more affordable
Yeah.
in the months to come is what we would expect. But again, we're in a unique year of 2021. It's kind of been a little crazy. So we hope we're correct, but your guess is as good as mine on that one. And you can see right along with that, the sirloin flap is right up there near the outside skirt in terms of pricing. There's not a big difference in pricing there, but there is a little advantage here in the sirloin flap that you might consider. And then when it comes to the flank and the inside skirt, in actuality, these have been running very similar and significantly below those. So these definitely might be something
Great
that you could
opportunity
consider.
to consider, yeah.
Yeah, great opportunity for many different menu applications here.
Without a doubt.
Yep. And really, I think that kind of sets us up perfect because I know that Chef Ashley is in the kitchen talking about menu applications.
Yes.
That she's cooking some stuff up there. So I think we should go ahead and just see what Chef Ashley's doing up front. So are you good to clean this up here? So I'm going to go check to see what she's doing.
He's going to go eat. That's really what it comes down to. It's great. Yep. See you later.
Chef Ashley, I could smell what you have cooking. As soon as I step foot out of the meat lab, I could smell what's going on. And I'm kind of curious, what do you got for us today?
Hi, Daniel. So I actually just cooked up some bavette steaks from the sirloin flap. And then I actually threw together the trim from cutting those bavette steaks into some steak bites that I have on the stove. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways I just used an entire sirloin flap, and they both have 2 totally different flavor profiles and will be 2 very different menu options for somebody.
That's awesome. And I'm curious though, because I think I can smell that sirloin flap. That's probably, you guys make this all the time here.
Yes.
That's probably one of my favorite dishes that you have. So can you tell me a little about it?
Yeah, so I personally, for the past few years, when somebody asks me what my favorite steak is, I always say the bavette steak. And it's mostly because of the way that it grills up so nicely with marinades. It takes on char so nicely. It cooks and creates this beautiful crust, especially when you use marinades that have a really heavy sugar component in them. So like a molasses or some kind of reduction from like a cola or something. But this specifically is our bourbon sriracha glaze. So this is a lot of brown sugar, some soy, we've got some fresh garlic in here, a little bit of vinegar. But when we reduce it down, it thickens up and it creates this perfect glaze to go on these bavette steaks. We marinate the bavette steaks in this marinade specifically, like overnight, 2 hours before grilling, whatever we want to do with it, and then we can also use it as a finishing glaze as well.
So let's talk a little bit about marinades. But before we do that, I got to mention, because we talked about it in the back, we showed like the full carcass and we explained what that was, and said that this is something to look forward to if you come to the Culinary Center. Well, I personally think that this right here is something you could even more look forward to coming to the Culinary Center, because I've had it and it's amazing. But first, I want to talk a little bit about that marinade that you kind of described, because I know people know what marinades are and that they work. But I want to talk a little about science behind marinades and what exactly going on. And you mentioned that marinades have salt in it. That's one of the most probably important things when it comes to a marinade, is that it has that salt. And what actually is happening in all types of marinades, it doesn't matter if it's something like here that has more of a sugary glaze or if it's more of a neutral marinade, that salt is a key component. Because that salt, actually, when you put it in the water, it tends to break down. And then as it gets inside the meat, that salt can actually interact with the proteins and unfold them so that they can start to interact with more water and make this be a little bit more tender as well. So that salt is really important for a marinade. Now, some other things that you might find also important for marinades are things like acid. Acid also can help break down the exterior, break down a little bit more connective tissue. It's just something that also works fantastic in some marinades.
Yeah, so I will say when you talk about acids, it brings me to thinking of thin meats in general, but also thinking specifically of outside, inside skirts, and then flank steaks. Mostly because those two cuts take on any kind of citrus-heavy, acid-heavy marinade so well because they cook so quickly. And sometimes you can get in a little bit of trouble with letting anything sit in an acid for too long when it comes to a protein. But with skirts and flanks, all it does is help break it down a little bit quicker. And then because of the quick cooking time on a flank or a skirt, it does nothing but just tenderize it and just add so much more flavor.
That's actually a great point that you bring up there, because the inside skirt and the flank in particular do, I agree completely. They do so well with those citrus marinades. But something important to point out about a citrus marinade is that not only has some citric acid in it that also helps break down the meat, but actually things like pineapple, for instance, has an enzyme in there called bromelain. And there's other types of enzymes that's found in nature as well. But specifically, pineapple has the bromelain one that's actually a pretty powerful proteinase. It actually goes down and breaks down proteins that makes it more tender. So that's a natural way to add. Anytime you use pineapple juice, for instance, you're going to make something more tender, and it does well for cuts that need a little bit more help, need a little bit more tenderization. So that's another good example there of what's going on with that marinade.
Yeah.
So do you want to explain here what you're plating up?
Yeah,
Again,
so this is honestly, again, one of my favorite steaks, and one of the best ways to kind of show it off is in the form of I'd say the three of these range from about 6 to 8 ounces of a center of the plate sirloin option. So that's why I love talking about this particular cut so much here at the center. It's because you can use it whole roasted on a carving station somewhere, feed a whole bunch of people, or you can make it way more intimate and do center of the plate cuts, which are really fun for chefs to plate up. You feel really special when you're ordering a center of the plate steak of any kind, but it's sirloin. I mean, and it performs so well this way. But I will say that one of the really big components to talking and kind of educating on how to serve the bavette steak is, yes, I've plated it this way. That's because I'm going to eat this after this session and I know how to slice it. But if you don't know how to slice against the grain, or you don't feel that your guest is going to quite understand the way to actually slice this properly, it's kind of really smart to maybe slice a couple of slices into the bavette steak to kind of guide that person into how to continually slice as they're eating it. Just because if you slice the bavette steak the wrong way, you will not be happy. So,
yeah, that is something that Di and I talked about in the back too, because that is so incredibly important. I can't agree more.
Yeah. But I do want to tell you, also, I'm adding a little Asian glaze to the pan over here that I have put the trim from the rest of the sirloin flap. I've cut it into little bite-sized pieces for steak bites. And I just fried them up in a pan with a little bit of brown butter. And I'm going to toss them with a little bit of garlic and an Asian glaze that we've put together. And this is another way that I utilize the whole cut and show two different cooking methods. So this was grilled. This is going to be pan-seared and simply cooked in like 2 or 3 minutes. I'll toss it at the very end and plate it up for you guys. But we can serve this over rice. We can serve this in tacos, in a pasta. It's really versatile. So I love to show that it's really important to use up the whole cut, and this is a really yummy way to do steak bites. So
Yeah, that's one thing that I know Diana could probably talk more to about when she comes back after she gets done cleaning up the meat lab. I think she's going to join us back up. She said be back in just a second. But she is going to talk, maybe we could talk a little about some of the research that we're doing. And I know some of those restaurateurs are trying to find applications for cuts cuts that have applications in many different ways. Okay, and what Chef Ashley's talking about is a great one, right? You can put that on as a steak option, as you see here, and then it could be some other completely different style of a dish somewhere else on the menu, that all comes back to that same dish or same cut.
Which, again, in the chef world is what the whole point is. So we're utilizing the entire cut, and we're giving you an experience that you're not going to have at home, hopefully.
Yeah.
So let me show you guys this really quick. So I've just added a little bit of mushroom and chili and some scallion to this.
Okay, that smells really good.
So this is the leftover, but not really leftover. It's a whole new dish. Asian steak bites. A little bit of sesame. Look at that. That's a whole sirloin flap.
That's pretty cool. The way you can just change those out.
Yeah.
Completely different dishes, completely even different, applications, right? But they are same cuts. That's kind of fun.
Yeah. So I'm sure that you guys talked about flank and skirt back there. I wasn't playing with any of that today, but I will mention, just while we're talking about it, when it comes to talking about citrus marinades and things, this is like Taco Tuesday's favorite couple of cuts. Fajita's best go-to is the flank. Again, you can do center of the plate with anything when it comes to beef, in my opinion. But when it comes to really craving that taco and margarita, you're going to want to go with some skirt. And we have a ton of recipes I'd love to share with any of you if you're interested in certain marinades.
Perfect. Chef Ashley, I actually see some questions coming in. So here's one of the first one directed specifically to what you just talked about. Chef Ashley, which of these cuts would you say is the most application friendly on a menu?
Yeah, and I think that this is exactly what we've done today. I would say the sirloin flap. And simply because of the fact that it can be a center of the plate option or a carving station cut, or you can trim or use the trim and do something like an appetizer application like steak bites or something that's more of an additive. So I would say sirloin flap.
Yeah, I think your versatility is shown with the examples you've got there, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So this is a question that really any of us could answer. Which cut do you think could give you the biggest bang for your buck? So which, I think out of the four, right? What do you think? We can maybe all answer this one. I can give you my opinion first. Okay. Mine is probably going to go back to that. Actually, I'm gonna take a cop out and probably say some of our value added products. Maybe our value added product inside skirt line. When you talk about it's already been marinated, right? When I think of right now, bang for your buck, you're paying for that labor and those value added products. So I'm gonna go with the cop out and say the value added product line. And I don't care which one you choose from there, but something out of that. With our current market, I think that's huge.
I'm sticking with #forgotten flank. I swear, I feel like the flank is just, everyone forgets about it now, and it needs to come back. I love that cut.
Yeah.
It's just
I
a
will
great
say
cut.
the flank is a really good cut to try and do at home one pan meals. Like if you heat a sheet or a cookie sheet up in your oven, and then put the flank on your cookie sheet with your marinade and your veggies around it. That's one of the beef recipes you can do actually using one pan, and it's with the flank.
Okay, I'm gonna have to do that now.
So I'm on team flank today too.
Hashtag forgotten flank.
So another question, when do we typically see the highest prices for each of these items? And this we talked a little bit about in the back, and I would say typically we do see these start to spike right there around late spring, early summer is when we see their seasonal highs. So that's something to keep in mind of doing that. Now, we are probably at that time. If you were to look at that graph today, you'd probably find there the highest price they've been all year long. But I do hope that as we continue going throughout the year that we'll see that start to go down with the months to come. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, for sure. Gearing up for Cinco de Mayo. So that's even to consider next year as you look forward to that. I mean, if you're starting to plan ahead, that's seasonality to always look at those different prices that you could find throughout the year of when that good buy would be.
Yep. Next is, why is it so important to cut the meat against the grain? So I'm gonna add. I'll make a comment here, and then if either you have something to add to this, that'd be great too. But the best way for me to kind of think about this is, right, imagine that you had a bundle of pencils. Okay, if you use a bundle, right, and if you tried to just, let's say you sliced it, right, you cut a big cross section out of there, and you tried to bite into it, right. If you bite into it, you're going to see those pencils like kind of collapse and go with each other. It'd be easier to bite through like that. If you go with the pencils, you're going to have to go across the entire pencil with every single bite. Pencils are probably a horrible example. You have another example that would make that a little bit more clear.
I mean, you just think of the integrity of the muscle fiber itself as more whole and together when you're cutting with the grain. So that's why we cut it against it. Essentially, you're trying to do some pre-chewing by cutting it against the grain ahead of time.
That's a much better explanation than the pencil one. That was.
I think you're just too smart for your own good. Sometimes, you just overthink things.
Wasn't there like a Twizzlers example?
Yes,
one day?
You just use the Twizzlers. Because, I mean, that's something that you actually bite into.
Versus like corn on the cob way of eating it.
Yes. Yeah. See, that...
Yeah.
Chef Ashley can also simplify.
Yep. It made sense in my head. But anyway, looks like we're out of time for questions. I hope we got yours answered. But if we did not and you still have some questions, feel free to reach out to us. Send them in. We'll definitely get back to you and answer whatever we can. But just go ahead and kind of do you guys have any closing comments you'd like to bring in?
I think the biggest thing to take away from this is the next time you're placing an order, just try one of these cuts. Even if you don't have something like it on your menu, I promise it would be worth it. Don't forget to look at our value-added options as well. We have a plethora of options. These thin meats that we talked about here today is just one of them, but we have a lot to offer in terms of our value-added category. And right now, during this labor shortage, we know that they'd be essential for your operation. So seriously check those out.
Yeah, and please feel free to reach out to me or any of the chefs on our team here at Certified Angus Beef and work with us to capitalize on the trends and applications across your menu that we can help you with, we know all about, and I can share recipes as well. So
awesome. We look forward to seeing you guys again. Thank you for joining us today. Next time we'll be back on July 14th. We'll actually bring Ken back. Just a little exciting news.
Maybe we can bring his little baby girl, because he did have a little girl too.
Yes, so that's exciting. So he'll be joining us back. And again, just thank you for joining, and we look forward to next time.